She said, "I don't love you," then asked me to marry her. I know how that sounds. It's a line that reads like a headline. It's dramatic, it's brutal. But the truth of that moment was quieter and messier than the sentence makes it sound. What she actually said was a breathy confession of fear, words born out of being abandoned before, out of an old wedding photograph that landed like a stone. It sounded like rejection because fear can sound that way. And because of that one sentence, everything that came after, the ring, the small apartment we built, the wedding by the river, felt earned in a way I hadn't expected. My name is David. I was 26, a software engineer who had perfected the art of predictable weekends. Groceries on Saturday, code on Sunday, a pot of coffee brewing too strong, and a cereal bowl on the counter. I'd spent 10 years of my 20s in a relationship that ended with me being gently labeled boring. After that, I learned to like being safe. I learned routines like armor. I liked the logic of my job. It was clean and solvable in ways people rarely were. Then my friends started nagging me. Sarah kept sending me profiles from the dating app she worked to convince me to try. "You can't code your way out of loneliness," she'd say, laughing. Matt, who'd been married 2 years by then, made a point of showing up with embarrassing couple photos and a lot of unsolicited advice. "You meet someone over coffee," he said once. "It's not that hard." He was wrong and right in the same breath. One evening, more boredom than courage, I swiped right. Her name was Lily. Her pictures were mostly of light. Sunlight on exposed brick, a cat curled around a stack of books, a smile that wasn't trying too hard. Her profile said she sold houses and collected plants. She wrote, "I like talking about the best coffee in town." That line was the clincher for me. I messaged, she messaged back. A date was set. Park bench of the internet replaced by a weathered table at a small cafe that smelled like cinnamon and old wood. The first time I saw Lily in person, she had a folder of floor plans tucked under her arm and a wool scarf that didn't match. Her cat, yes, the cat, had a name tag emoji next to her in every photo, and in real life she kept murmuring about the way light hit a living room and whether it made the space feel honest. We laughed easy. The jokes were small. At some point I made a joke about proposals, because that is what you do when you are trying to sound casual, and I folded a napkin into a terrible paper ring and slid it toward her. "If you ever want a promise," I said, "this is all I have for now." She put the napkin ring on, then looked up and said, "I hope you keep that promise." It landed somewhere I hadn't prepared for. It was a little sentence, almost offhand, but it hung between us like a coat we both put on without asking. It wasn't that she demanded anything grand. It was the weight behind that small hope, like a lighthouse on a shore. I walked away from that date with a crooked paper ring in my pocket and a feeling that something small had planted itself, quietly, at the center of my chest. The next months were not cinematic. They were deliveries and late-night playlists and the kind of mornings where someone would text, "Coffee," and the other person would say, "I'll be there in 10. Lily left books on my couch with pages turned to lines she wanted me to read. I left voicemails of the dumbest things. She introduced me to her cat, who took to claiming my lap like it had always been hers. We built rituals the way people build houses, one small brick at a time. She would drop an extra cup of coffee on my desk when she had an open house in my neighborhood. I'd fix an old lamp in her living room and she'd say, "You make things better." It was not fireworks. It was steady and slow and, for me, deeply terrifying. I kept waiting for the reason it would end, the hidden crack in the foundation. Friends noticed. Sarah teased me for being oddly domestic. Matt pretended to be baffled at how I could be so domesticated. "You're like a different species," he joked once, punching my shoulder with the kind of affection only friends who are married get to show. We all laughed, but beneath the jokes was a kind of awe. Both of us had been doing relationship work we barely knew how to name. We were learning to show up in small ways. Then one night, months in, the quiet we'd been building got a jolt. Lily slipped into a half-closed world I hadn't been invited into. I noticed it first in the way her texts changed tone, shorter, later, as if she was moving farther away by inches. Then she started missing the little things. A coffee she'd said she'd pick up, a dinner we'd planned. On a Tuesday, she told me she had a few hours free, then went quiet. I called and her phone went to voicemail. I drove over, thinking maybe she'd gotten stuck at work. Maybe the cat had knocked over a plant. When I saw her, she was on the couch with a stack of invitations and an old Facebook notification open on her phone. Her ex's wedding. She didn't hide it. The photo slide showed a smiling face of a person she'd once trusted, now ringed by other people's happiness. I remember the apartment smelling like lemon and laundry detergent. The cat was asleep, indifferent to the human drama. Lily sat with her knees pulled to her chest, and when she spoke, it was small. "I thought I was okay," she said. "I thought I was okay with him moving on. But I kept thinking, what if that's me next? What if I never get past the part where they leave?" There it was. Fear, raw and simple. It wasn't an accusation aimed at me. It was an old wound opening. The words that poured out were fractured. Somewhere in that silence she said things that sounded like, "I don't love you." They weren't finished sentences so much as the sound of someone trying to keep from breaking. I felt like someone had thrown a curtain over the room. My first instinct was to fix it, to say the things that would make her feel safe. But the years of being called boring, and of being told I could not keep people carried weight. I panicked. I thought maybe I'd been walking around in someone else's life and I'd missed a sign. I stayed. That was the simplest thing I could do. I made coffee and put the mug down without asking. I sat on the floor because the couch looked too formal. I let the cat find me and ignore me. I listened. She talked in fragments, about her fear of being left, about the time she'd been 14 and waited outside a closing door until the car drove away. She talked about how, in the past, a partner had folded up like origami beneath pressure. She said she didn't know how to trust that someone would stay when things were ordinary and messy. I could have tried to outtalk the fear. I could have offered promises I couldn't keep. Instead, I did the thing I needed to learn how to do. I promised presence. "I can't tell you won't be hurt again," I said, "but I can tell you I'll be here. I'll show up. I'll go to the small things." It was not the hero line you hear in movies. It was a quiet, almost clumsy vow. She cried a little. The cat licked her hand. We didn't kiss to heal everything. We stayed and let the silence be part of the conversation. Over the next weeks, presence became our practice. When she woke up anxious, I would pick up a bagel from the corner shop and leave it on her counter with a dumb note. "For future David, don't burn bagels, please." She responded with post-it notes left inside the books she returned. Page 142. Thought of you. Our intimacy wasn't made of dramatic declarations so much as smaller, repeated acts. Those acts started to matter. The napkin ring I'd once made as a joke lived in my wallet now, folded and softened. I found comfort in it, as if a paper ring could be a reminder of how we began, clumsy and honest. There were days of doubt. I still feared that something simple would topple us. A misread text, a bad week at work, a memory that surfaced. But the textures of our lives together began to knit. We moved in after a while, not with the fanfare of a checklist, but with the same care we gave to leftovers and furniture decisions. Lily's plants took over my windowsill. My shelves acquired rugs. The cat rearranged our priorities. One night while I was paying bills, I caught myself smiling at the way she hummed in the kitchen. It felt like watching a slow sunrise. A few months after the wedding notification incident, after we'd moved in and after some nights of real, boring domesticity, I started thinking about promises in a different way. The napkin ring in my wallet had become a talisman. It had no gold, no polish, just the crease where I'd folded it, and the faint coffee stain where I'd forgotten it in my pocket. Still, every time I took it out in my hand, the paper felt heavy in a way that surprised me. Not heavy like an obligation, but heavy with meaning. It reminded me of a quiet moment that had shifted me. One Saturday morning, I walked to the cafe where Lily and I had had our first date. The place smelled the same, milk and cinnamon and the rhythmic hiss of steam. There were the same wooden tables, the same chipped cups. The barista, who by then knew our order, gave me a conspiratorial nod and a small smile that said, "You're doing something important." I had the napkin ring folded inside my palm and, tucked beside it, something I had bought last week in a small box with a cheap ribbon, a simple silver band. I didn't want anything ornate. I wanted something honest, like our rituals. I wanted armor that matched the paper's humility. I waited. When Lily arrived, she had a stack of keys and the cat nose pressed against her jacket. She sat down and looked at me with that same steady curiosity she always had. The cafe hummed around us. I handed her a coffee and then, very deliberately, I took the napkin ring out of my wallet and set it on the table. "Do you remember this?" I asked. She laughed, like a bright exhale. "Of course." I unfolded it slowly, as if unfolding something fragile. It wasn't some grand gesture, just a paper ring and a hand trembling a little. Then I opened the little box with the silver band. The sound of it clicking open was oddly loud. I heard the coffee grinder pause and the low murmur of conversation soften. I said something I'd practiced, and then scrapped a dozen times, until only the honest version remained. "I don't know the right way to do this," I said. "I learned to do small things. I learned to be here. I bought this because I want to keep showing up. Will you marry me?" She blinked. The look on her face was not the surprised movie cliché. It was open and soft and a little stunned in the best way. Her jaw moved as if she were checking the words for fit. Then she reached out and slid the silver band from my hand onto her finger, and she took the paper ring and set it beside the metal one like they were a matched set. A before and an after. "Yes," she said. It was concise and it was everything. The cafe clapped, politely, the way people clap for strangers' happiness, and the barista handed us 2 complimentary biscotti like a benediction. We hugged, and the cat, who had been perched on the back of her chair, hopped down and head-butted my shin as if to approve. People always think proposals are big speeches and elaborate plans. Ours was the opposite. Quiet, a little goofy, and perfectly us. It mirrored how the relationship had grown. Accidental, repeated, humble. The napkin ring and the silver band became a small collection of symbols that carried the weight of the choices we made daily. To show up, to sit with fear, to repair, and to laugh. We married the following spring by the river. It was a short ceremony. Sunlight fell through budding trees. Matt officiated with awkward tenderness. Sarah cried at least twice, and the cat made a cameo in the form of a tiny brooch pinned to Lily's jacket. There were no fireworks, no crowd, just a handful of friends who had watched us build something slow and steady. Our vows were not perfect sentences. They were an honest list of the things we promised to do. Make coffee when the mornings are dark. Listen without fixing first. Keep the tiny paper ring in an old leather wallet that would be mine forever. Life after that has been ordinary in the best possible way. We argue about dumb things, dishes and where the cat should sleep. And we share quiet comforts. There are nights when the old fears surface, just to be reminded those scars still exist. But more often there are mornings when we sit in the same space and the conversation melts into the small acts that carried us here. A note tucked into a book, a cup of coffee left on the counter, a grocery haul debated in the doorway. There are also reminders of how small beginnings matter. That napkin ring still lives in my wallet, folded soft, next to a receipt from that first cafe. It has coffee stains like scars and corners worn smooth from being taken out and folded back in. It's ridiculous and precious. If the title of this video grabbed you, I hope you're with me still. Not because of the shock of that first line, but because of what it tries to hold. That people can say terrible, fearful things from old hurts and still mean something fundamentally different. Lily's words that night sounded like a wall going up, but they were coming from a place of being scared to be left again. They were not an absolute verdict on our love. They were a raw confession of vulnerability. The fact that she could say those fragile things and then, later, ask me to marry her, that felt like the real miracle. It wasn't that she'd been lying or that I'd refused to see the truth. It was that we both learned how to stay while things were messy and how to turn small. Repeated acts into promises that lasted. I've kept thinking about promises. A promise doesn't always start as a contract wearing diamonds and rhetoric. Sometimes a promise is a napkin folded into a ring, or a bagel left on a counter, or a voicemail at midnight when anxiety is loud. If you asked me what made our marriage real, I would say those small, ordinary acts, the ones that say, without flourish, I will be here. Before I go on, quick thing. If stories like this, the small, awkward, true ones, matter to you, subscribe. There are more of them, and I've learned that the ordinary often has the best lessons. A few practical things I learned that I wish someone had told me earlier. First, don't try to fix fear with words alone. Presence matters more than the perfect sentence. Second, be willing to be ordinary with someone. You can build a kind of extraordinary out of routine. Third, hold on to the small objects, the goofy tokens, because they become the way you say things you haven't figured out how to say out loud. Sometimes viewers ask if I regret that scary moment when Lily pulled back. The short answer is no. That silence pushed us into a conversation we needed to have. It forced us to choose presence over performance. If she had never been scared, we might have never practiced staying. It's paradoxical. Our most honest, most fragile moments became the doorway to deeper trust. People also ask about the napkin ring now. It sits in my wallet like a tiny relic. I take it out once in a while when I'm nervous, before a meeting, before a talk, before anything where I need to remember the promise I made to myself. Show up. The silver band I put on the day I asked her still sits on her hand. Sometimes she wears both. Sometimes she wears one. We don't put much stock in symbols, but we don't dismiss them either. They're shorthand for a life we decided to keep building together. And the cat, because the cat deserves a paragraph, still rules the apartment. It has opinions about placement of throw pillows and firmly believes my laptop is a warm bed designed by fate. Lily says the cat was our first real commitment. I think she's right. If there's one thing I want you to take away, it's this. Words can be weapons and they can be cries for help. Context matters. A sentence like, "I don't love you" might sound like an end, but sometimes it's the shape of fear coming out wrong. Don't let one sentence be the entire story. Look for the following actions. Watch for the person who shows up on the hard days. That's where the real promises live. I still laugh when I think of standing in that cafe with a paper ring and a cheap silver band. It felt ridiculous and terrifying and perfect. It was the kind of moment that makes sense only after you live it. You find a way to honor the small rituals that built you, and then you try to make one of those small things into a more deliberate choice. So if you've ever kept a silly token, a ticket stub, a note, a pressed leaf, tell me about it in the comments. What tiny thing do you still carry that reminds you of someone who stayed? Share it below. And if this story landed on some corner of you, the part that's been waiting for someone to show up, pass it along to someone who needs a reminder that ordinary promises can be enough. We're still learning. We're still folding napkins and making coffee and making mistakes. But I'm glad she said the thing that sounded like a wall, because it led us to the work of building a door. And when she slid that napkin ring and the silver band together on the table, it felt like a promise we could keep.